everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated to survivors of child sexual abuse everywhere across the world. My pleasure each week to bring you a survivor or a survivor-related topic on this, and I think it's really important that people feel they have somewhere they can share their story or their truth without feeling judged or misunderstood. My name's Gloria Masters and I'm your host. As with all shows, there's a trigger warning, and people ask me why. Well, because we are dealing with child sexual abuse, and something that our next guest may say may have you feeling upset or uncomfortable. So if that happens, please stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be directed to some resource and support. I'd like to introduce you now to this amazing survivor. His name is John Cardamone. He's all the way from Victoria, Melbourne in Victoria, over in Australia, and he is a survivor, educator, and speaker. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction, Gloria. It's an absolute privilege to be here and to have some really great but deep and important conversations around uh, trauma and abuse and navigating our way through where we are today.
Yeah, no. So it's so amazing that you could join me today. And look, John, for our listeners watching and our survivors watching, one thing you may say may just help them significantly. And so we just don't know who you're going to be helping today. So kudos to you. Thank you.
No
So
worries.
as with all guests, I'd love you to start at the beginning, just what you're comfortable to share with us, John, in terms of child sexual abuse, and let's take it from there.
Yes, so born and raised in Melbourne, where the best coffee is, of course, in the world. So just so your listeners are aware of that. Very passionate about that, but that's another topic. Um, yeah, so born and raised in Melbourne, grew up in a typical, stereotypical family. Brought up in a strict Italian family, with two brothers and one sister. Um, like most young boys, pretty boisterous. Love to be outside and get dirty, play my AFL. Soccer, not so much rugby. So I do apologise to you New Zealand listeners. I still can't understand rugby union and rugby league and what the differences are. But loved most sports. Had a thirst to connect with my family and connect with my friends and made friends easily. So everything was going pretty good up until around age 6 or 7, and unfortunately, that's when a family member started to sexually abuse me at their place of residence at the time. Unfortunately, this went on for a few years, and I guess prior to that, um, my parents and especially my mum shares that I was a well behaved child and looking back, when the abuse was happening, I was having some really behaviors of concern, meltdowns, a lot of separation anxiety, a lot of nightmares. So obviously, my parents being really concerned, um, they booked me in to see psychiatrist, and I saw them for a number of years. However, I was unable to disclose what was happening, and I think maybe later on we'll chat about that on why, and how we can try and help to prevent and educate our children today as adults. Um, yeah, so this would happen every Sunday for 2 years, and I just remember acting like a spoiled child, not wanting to go, and I would express that in ways through um, vomiting, begging not to go, through crying, chucking tantrums, and having meltdowns. Um, and doing everything I can apart from saying why I didn't want to go. And I think listeners on your channel might know why that might be, and if they don't, that's something that we can certainly explore. But now that I think back, looking at that little boy, what that did to his brain at that point in time, knowing what was coming, my parents not knowing what was happening, they said I had to go, because, you know, especially in an Italian family, visiting members of family was important. Going there to, yeah. So that's a little bit of the background. And
Can I ask you something? Are you a
please,
are you able to, and fine if you don't wish to, you able to provide whether this was a male or female abuser?
yeah, male.
Male. Okay. And clearly related to mum or dad, if they're extended family. Uh,
Yes.
so you would be left there for the day or just a couple of hours or
Yeah. So my perpetrator um, would certainly, and I think this is another important topic, Gloria, is that perpetrators groom uh, parents to have access to the child.
yeah.
And again, happy to unpack that, if you need, for your listeners. But so obviously that was taking place, and I remember them taking me to, yabbying and fishing. So really understanding what my interests were and taking advantage of that. But most of the time, they would take advantage by having me alone in the household, but remembering at times that there was people in the house while it was happening. So, it's important to know that it can happen under the noses of different carers at the time. So that's kind of how it happened, I guess.
And were your siblings required to be at that place with you, or was it just you?
It was just me at those points in time. Yeah.
So, I'm just thinking of that beautiful little 6-year-old, yeah, who in every way possible was screaming for help, and showing through behavior as opposed to words that something's terribly wrong. And now, of course, if they look back, I don't know if your parents are aware. Have you been able to share what happened?
Oh, absolutely. Parents, extended family, close friends know, and just recently, I've shared this on my social media, and I think that was, yes, that was another step for me to really not to heal, or not to be afraid or ashamed to share it, but just another step for me to that I'm ready to try and help myself and others. So I was able to do that recently, a few months back, and I've also shared my story on a website called Braveheart, and they're a great organisation, and so I've shared my survivor story on their website.
Fantastic. Are you able to share with us? Because sometimes for our beautiful audience watching, hello, lovely survivors. Sorry, I forgot to say hello.
Mm,
Um, that you know what age you were when you were able to share with your parents what had happened.
mm.
Are you able?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So I was 8 years old. Um, and I shared it with my mum. So you could call me a mummy's boy. I'm still certainly a mummy's boy now these days. But I certainly really wanted to share that with my mum. I just didn't know how to. And I keep asking myself, why did it take so long? And being an educator now and working with young children, I do know why that was the case. But I remember sharing, and I remember the exact words that I used, and it really goes back to why I probably didn't share it, was that, "You believe me, mummy, you believe me, mummy." And that was something that was repeated, and it's something that my mum remembers, and it still, is something that she carries with her. Um, but how I disclosed it, I think it came to a point where my body and my mind and brain were just so tired of, communicating in different ways that, 2 years is a long time and there's a lot of development in that time. So I was able to have the courage to disclose, and luckily, and I think it's another important topic that happy to chat about. But I was one of the fortunate survivors now that my mum believed me unconditionally,
Mm.
without questioning, without
Mm.
raising her eyebrows and saying, Are you sure? Maybe it was just playing," because I know, going through my journey now, there's a lot of survivors that were questioned or either not believed, and not having that validation can really impact. And I'm going through that currently, where there's a family member that, although that they do believe me, but they have that mentality of it happened over 30 years ago, drop the grudge and that sort of thing, which it's not fine, but for me in my healing, I accept it, and
Yes.
we need to yeah. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a nutshell.
Yes, and I think, thank you. Thank you for that. That's really powerful. I'm so pleased for you that your mum believed you and that
Mm,
you did that instantly. That's such an important part of healing, I think, is to share it the first time and have that validation, because not all of us have been that lucky. So John, that's amazing. Um, and you've raised so many interesting things.
mm,
And I guess one of the ones I want to pick up on, if okay with you, is, you know, someone saying, that's a 30-year-old grudge, let it go, or do you still have to talk about it, or why can't you move on? And I think let's be really clear here, survivors, and John, be keen to know your thoughts. If you are disbelieved or made to feel that, why do you have to talk about it, or are you holding a grudge? All that does is launch us straight back into that small body at that age
mm,
and have us feel less than, minimized, undermined, devalued, and that what we feel and experience and share is not valid. So
mm,
any non-survivors watching, don't be that person. That's just damaging to us. What do you
mhm.
think, John?
So, there's 2 parts for me. I'm privileged to be able to have the mindset that I was believed straight away, as a child and as an adult. So, but on the flip side, another family member, at the time that they did believe me, and they put in protective factors, um, but I'm not getting the validation that I've needed from them. So that was another thing that I've had to work through, because that was something that was quite upsetting and really disappointing, and made me quite anxious, and would trigger me. But I've learnt now that I don't need anyone else's validation. The only validation that I need is my own. It helps that people absolutely. It helps my healing that my wife, in particular, my mum and other family members validate what had happened and are really supportive. But I think for your adult survivors that are listening, and that they're still going through wanting to people believe them, and that can turn into anger. I'm certainly not angry, and my advice would be is easier said than done, to try find acceptance from that person and understand, in my case anyway, they're at their capacity of understanding. So I'm trying to empathize, with their mindset, and they're at a point where they just don't understand the gravity of what's happened. And that's okay, because everyone's at a different point of I think, their emotional intelligence, the capability of understanding something, and also understanding that although something terrible happened to us, this can be hard for other people too, and it's really hard for them to talk about. So, um, I don't want to come across that it's happened to me, so I'm entitled to that. Everyone should which in reality, in the perfect world, that should be the case, but that's never gonna happen. So I accept it. So I think acceptance is really important, and feeling not needing that, we need their validation, and that not to be angry, because anger is a healthy emotion, but it's not healthy if it's really bringing you down every day and really impacting your daily life. So I'm at a place where I've accepted it. If I happen to talk to them and it comes up, I'm very calm, and I'm really empathetic, and I really kill with kindness, and that can be unnerving for people. So I'm like, yep, totally understand that you're in a place where I feel like you don't understand it, and that's okay. But this is how I feel, and if it's too hard for us to talk about, that's okay. I've got other people and other champions that I can talk to.
I think there's a few things in there. So one is I understand what you're saying. This whole topic is so uncomfortable for people, partly because
Mm,
if they have no knowledge of it, it goes against every fiber of their being, so that makes it difficult,
mm,
uncomfortable. But secondly, there's also the fact they then try and get their head around why would an adult choose to do that to a small child?
mhm,
Um, but equally, because of their discomfort, it's unlikely they can hold any space for us. So
mhm,
I understand what you're saying. I think for survivors like myself who were not believed or validated in any way, the decimation of your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-love, can just be quite major. So I do understand for survivors that perhaps haven't been validated the pain of that and the extra
mhm,
work and the miles that have to be trudged through to try and overcome and reach a place of self-acceptance. Because if that hasn't been, if part of you has not been accepted, John, it can feel really uncomfortable then to see yourself as a whole,
mhm.
uh, wonderful person that we know survivors are. And
Yeah.
when you think about your siblings, your extended family, people believed you, and I sincerely hope that for your sake and for other children that that person was stopped.
Mm.
Or was there any police activity involved? Or
Y-
yeah,
Yeah, so a part of my healing, and I'm very grateful for my mum. So as soon as I told her, the police were called, and so I was never have had to be exposed to that perpetrator ever again. And
good,
I'm forever grateful
good,
for my mum acting out in such a way. So and they were convicted. In my belief, it was a bit of a slap on the wrist, but this was back in the early '90s, and a lot of things have changed now, which is for the better. We've got a long way to go still, but really important to acknowledge that we have come a long way for the better. But they were certainly charged and convicted for what had happened.
good, good, as they should be. So, John, how was your 8 years old, you told mum, instantly believed, action was taken. Thank heavens. What was the rest of the childhood like for you?
Yeah. So I was really fortunate that after that, although I had my anxieties and things like that, I'm very fortunate. I've never turned to drugs or alcohol or any of those sort of substances. I actually had for over 30 years. I've been pretty good. Like I've had a really great primary and high school years where social butterfly. My relationships haven't really been impacted. I'm happily married with 2 children, and that doesn't mean I'm fixed. I'm still certainly, I think we're all in a work in progress, whether we've had trauma or not. I think we're
Yes.
all work. But given what had happened, I've had a relatively, well, we can measure successful in lots of different ways, but if we look at the norm, I've been able to, have a pretty good job. I'm an assistant principal in a primary school. You might call it a vice principal in New Zealand, I'm not sure, but, um,
Deputy.
no.
Depu
Oh, deputy, yes. Um,
Deputy.
so we've
Mm.
yeah. So I've been able to cope. I mean, I've had some severe anxiety, and I still do. Um, However, in the last year and a half, I've been really triggered, and it's really come up a lot for me. And one of the main reasons is that because my son is now the same age, and it's really flooded back a huge amount of memories. I still have memories, and they're like a movie reel for me. What the abuser was doing, I can still hear him. Um, and hopefully it's not too explicit for your listeners, but I remember as a child asking him to stop because it was hurting, but still remember him some of his responses, and so that really triggered me because I would think that my son was in my place, and I felt helpless to help him because it was in my mind. So that was really, really difficult and a challenging time. I'm doing a lot better now because I try not to engage or fuse with those memories, but it took me a long time to get to this place, and a lot of professional help, which I highly advise people to engage with, and that can look like a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be talk therapy, but and happy to talk about all those different options. But yeah, so I think for me, my three key things that I believe that have helped me over 30 years to cope relatively okay is connection. I'm really big on connecting with family and friends and communities and sport. So connection's a huge one. Having a sense of belonging, and that goes hand in hand with connection. So a sense of belonging with your family, extended family, friends, but also being active within the community. So I was being active with the large amounts of sporting groups, and now that I look back, that they were vital for me to I didn't know it at the time, but that was keeping me together, and really was able for me to have an active but healthy lifestyle. Um, so I think that and hope. I'm really a big believer in hope, and it's not just hope about that we're going to get better or hope we're going on holidays. It's all the little things. What really gets me through the day is thinking about, oh, I can't wait. I get up at 5 o'clock or so every morning because I can't wait to get out of bed to have my morning coffee, to play Uno with my kids. So all those little things, I think are really important, and we need to bring to the forefront of our own minds. So for me, connection, sense of belonging, and hope are my things that have helped me cope.
Okay, so and that's I think that's incredible and really inspiring actually. I just want to take you back to your son being the same age you were and just talk to you a little about that. Do you know that's actually a thing? I'd like to have a professional term for it, but I don't know what it is. But that's actually very, very typical, John, that the age your same-sex child is when you were being
Mm,
abused, all the triggers and all the memories and everything can really start coming at you hard and fast.
mm,
And it's very, very powerful, isn't it? Because that whole experience, in a way, and survivors watching may not see this, but I've managed to turn that round into some more validation and vindication. Because what I think is, congratulations, you're just reconfirming that everything you had described or experienced was true, and here's more
mm,
confirmation. So there are some positive ways of kind of looking at what happened so that we can live with it and move on from it. But doesn't it surprise you that it's that age, that exact age, John,
Uh,
where,
Yeah, and I went and saw a psychologist recently because I really wanted to understand
yeah,
why for 30 odd years that, yes, at times I would think about the images and the movie reels that I have, but I was able to kind of just get on with it. But what I was told was I was able to do that, one, because luckily for me, I was believed in as a child. That can be huge in healing. But two, uh, I've lost my train of thought. But two, the mind is so powerful that I was just using it as a protective mechanism, just to push it away and just to get on. And he said, because I was so connected and had a sense of belonging, they were protective factors and layers that were helpful for me. So we can see now that adult survivors that may isolate themselves, um, and we know now isolation and having a sense of loneliness are not only are people in that state are more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, and I don't want to say it and scare people, but early death. It's really scary. Um, so for me, counteracting that by accident, in terms of being active and wanting to be healthy and joining clubs, I was able to have those layers in place. Um, but my that psychologist at the time was saying this is so common when parents have their child and they're at that similar age of when their child is at the same age as when I was sexually abused. It can just bring up a whole flood of memories.
Yes.
And the other aspect of that is you losing that sense of control, because in my mind I was catastrophizing that that might happen to my son, or lots of other thoughts, and that can really build on anxiety, and then you can just see how it can just catastrophize, and that's where we need to snowball is a good word. So but lucky enough, I've had some early intervention at a young age, but I was able to be proactive, and get professional help to really understand what this all means.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that that happened. So, John, I know you'll be surprised, but that's the end of part one. So, please stay right there while I close out with our audience. Survivors. It's always fascinating to me, and I'm always eternally grateful that we get survivors who have different experiences because it helps us learn and grow our understanding of how, even though we put this into child sexual abuse, there's so many different ways this can happen and so many different impacts, and how valid the people around us are at the time. So, John mentioned a lot actually, but some of the key ones I want to leave you with for this part are the connection, the sense of belonging, and the hope. And hope is often the last call, if you like, or the last thing to die. So as long as we have hope, we have everything. So in the meantime, until we get to part two, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.